Recording. See if I can remember to turn it off next time.
I'll try and remind you.
So today I'm going to repeat to some extent. This was the fly we tied last week, which is the simple golden stone. So when the guys were talking last week, we were talking about, well, the stoneflies on the Cowichan are a lot bigger and darker, which of course is the case for the stoneflies on the Bow River. And that brought to mind a pattern that Barry White from the Bow River Guide tied several years ago. And it was a stonefly that's tied where the body is made out of burlap. So that's what we're going to tie today, is a burlap stone. And I'll quickly go through the materials. The hook is a Mustad 9672 standard wet fly hook with a turn down eye. It's a 3X long, and I'm using a size 8 because that's about the size of some of the stones on bow, maybe even a little bigger. And it's optional. You can put a bead on them. So these are a 5mm bead for that hook size. I got those at Robinson's. So you put the bead on first, take the barb off your hook and put it in the vise. And as I showed you last week, I'm going to hold on to the tag end of the lead wire. And this is 025, a little bigger than last week, because it's a bigger fly and I want a flatter body. And holding on to that tag end right where the barb is. And I'm going to wind forward in touching turns all the way up the hook shank. So between the bead and the lead wire, or lead free wire, if you want to use that, you should be able to get this thing to the bottom of a fairly fast flowing section of river. These stoneflies, they tend to live in that fast water where it's well oxygenated, and they don't mind being, they cling to the bottom pretty good. So you want to be able to get down there. So having a bit of weight is nice. And my lead wire just unwound. So there we go. Put that back in the box. And I take the little tag end off here. I'm going to use that a little bit of the clip. I'm going to see if I can get a bulk order of these test clips from DigiKey. And if I do, I might have some to sell.
I'd definitely be interested in a few.
Yeah, I'll see what I can do. So once I got that on and I get the tag ends kind of buried here. There you go. And start the thread, which is, I'm using 8/10 because the 8/10, I can probably get the finished wraps and a few other things to work a little better with 8/0 thread. You could probably get away with 6/0 in this size and larger. But I go over top of the lead wire just to cinch it in place so it doesn't spin around when I start wrapping stuff around the body. And when I get to the back, I'm going to put a few wraps of thread right behind the lead wire to build a little transition there between the bulk of the body and the hook shank. I'm going to do that right back to right about where the point is. That's not too bad. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to put a little, these stoneflies have a little bit of their body that sticks out behind their little tails at the tag end. So the dubbing I'm using is squirrel band, because it dubs onto the thread nicely. You can make a fine dubbing noodle, but it's got enough antron that it makes it easier. I tried using this stuff, which is chopped up burlap, but I could not get it to adhere to the thread, even with dubbing wax. So I gave up on that idea. I'm going to use small amounts of the dubbing and get it on there. And I'm not going to use very much to start with here. All I'm going to do is build a little transition in behind the lead wire and a little bit of bump right there that sticks up above the lead wire. So nice and tightly dubbed, slide it up there, and then do a few wraps behind the lead wire to get it nice smooth transition to the hook. And then finish it off by wrapping right at the lead wire end. And we make a little bit of a bump of dubbing. And the purpose of this bump is to give us a place to attach the biots. Now that I got that prepped, I'm going to take my pliers that again are flat jawed pliers. I'm going to squish down along the body with the pliers to make it flat across the sideways across the hook. That end is sticking out. So I just squish it flat. That little piece does not want to go down. There we go. That's a little better. So now I've got a flat body. Going to bring my thread up now to the front. The rib is going to be a fine gold wire. Stuff is pretty fine. I just have to get the right piece here. Take that off there. And what I do with this gold wire is I put the end of it right behind the bead, just barely on top of the hook. And then as I wrap down to tie it in, I'm going to try and force that wire off to the side of the hook, side of the lead, so that again, I'm building some width to this body so that it's not cylindrical. When I get to the back, I'm just going to try and push it down a little bit right by that bump in the tail. Now, the tail on these things is going to be goose biots. And they come off, they come off, you can get them off the actual goose feather, but you can also buy them in these little strips that have been all stripped right off the goose feather. And they come in a lot of different colors. There's black, brown, tan, and if you want to get really fancy, there's even bright red ones. And we'll talk about biots next week too, because I'm going to do a biot body fly next week. So the thing with these guys is you want ones that are fairly long. That's why I use goose and not duck biots. And you pull them off the stem one at a time. And as I pointed out to you last week, when you pull them off, there's this little telltale for when you're tying them on as a body that you want to leave attached. But for this fly, I'm going to just snip off where that little notch is. I'm going to lay it down. It's got a bit of a natural curve to it. So I'm going to lay it down at a 45-degree angle across the top of that little bump of material. of dubbing, about a 45-degree angle away. Make one wrap over to hold it in place, make sure it's the right position and length. And then I then wrap down the biot so that it's kind of on the side of the lead there. That keeps the angle in place. Bring my thread back to the same place, and I'll repeat that. We repeat that with the next biot. Again, trim right where that notch is, just because it goes a little funny if you wrap it down the side with the notch in place. Again, curve down and at 45 degrees across the other way. Hold it with my finger, one wrap to make sure it's in place, and maybe adjust the length, and then over top and down the side of that wire body. Now you can see I've got a nice pair of biots that are well wrapped in place, and they're a good V behind, and with that little ball of dubbing sticking out behind. Now, the body is burlap, and this came off of probably burlap that somebody used to wrap a tree for winter protection. You can get it off burlap bag that holds all sorts of things. And I just pull out the individual string from that woven burlap. Bring my thread back up to the front, right behind the bead, and tie it in there on the side facing me, the side of the lead wire facing me, and take it right back down to where the biots are tied in. Bring my thread back up just in front of halfway. Now the body's not going to be any more than halfway up. You see this stuff is all fuzzy, and I don't want the body to be too fuzzy. So what I'm going to do is I take the burlap and I twist it counterclockwise to tighten up that burlap thread over the top and right back where the biots are, underneath, over the top. And every time I make a wrap around the hook, I give it a little sort of half twist with my fingers counterclockwise. What that does is that tightens up that body so it doesn't have a whole lot of crap sticking out. So it's not fuzzy. I want it nice and tight. Keep doing that. Make sure those wraps are snug up against one another. And when I get to the halfway point, which is about there, I stop and I wrap, then you wrap down over top of the burlap string, back and in front, and then cut it off. That's it for the burlap part. Take my wire and I will counter wrap across the burlap so that the wire doesn't sink into the grooves where the burlap is. I want it to sit on the top. And keep the wraps close together, probably 4, maybe 5. Get to the front of that body and 2 or 3 wraps behind. Nice and snug. Pull it back. A couple of wraps over the front. And then see if I can helicopter this wire out of there. Out of there. Maybe not. Yep, there we go. So now I have a fairly short body that has nice segmentation to it with that nice gold wire over top. And I've left approximately half of the shank of the hook still exposed. Then dubbing. The front half of the body is going to be a mixture of dubbing or dubbing and a few other things. Again, I'm going to use the same squirrel dubbing and spin it on the hook. And this time I don't want a really skinny little noodle. I want a little bit thicker, probably about 3 times the thickness, 3 or 4 times the thickness of the thread. And I'll do this in small increments. Wrap over that transition and build a body in that location that's almost double the diameter of the burlap at the back. Again, take your time doing this with thinner dubbing ropes with multiple wraps, and you have a better chance of controlling the shape of that thorax, which you want to be, again, quite a bit chunkier than the body of the fly, which is already fairly chunky. And you'll notice I'm not going very far forward here at this point. So when I get a thorax that's probably to stop about 2/3 up the hook shank with this stubbing. So I got a nice little bulb of thorax there. This is where I'm going to put the legs in. And the legs is a small grizzly hackle. And you peel off all of the fuzz at the bottom here. And I want the hackle to be a little more than gap, like 1.5 times the gap of the hook. Tie it in by the bottom, the stem, with a little bit of stem exposed, and tie it down, wrap in front, clip it off so that the stem doesn't come out. Get my hackle pliers, and I've tied it in so that the feather curves away from me with the intensely colored part facing me. Grab the tip. I'm going to do a wet fly technique with this. I'm going to grab the fibers of the feather as I wrap and kind of pull them back, so they're kind of out of the way towards the back of the fly. And we're only going to do maybe 3 wraps of this around, maybe 4. We'll see how bulky that is. Maybe just up one more time. So that's about 3 wraps, right tight to each other. Tie over behind the hackle, and then cinch it down in front, wiggling my thread through there so I don't trap too many fibers facing forward. Get the tip out. Now at this point, my fly is going to be flat on the top and flat on the bottom. So I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to lay them down on the hook shank right on top of the body. And I'm just trimming off the hackle fibers that stick above the lateral line on the fly. So I'm not going to bother doing the bottom yet. Here we do a little more dubbing. This is why we stop halfway up, because there's a lot of stuff goes on at the front of the fly. So make a nice tight dubbing rope again. And I'm going to wrap this in front of the hackle. To do that, wet your fingers, pull the hackle back out of the way, and wrap about the same thickness of body and relatively short, not too long. I'm still leaving a bit of space between the dubbing and the eye of the fly. Wrap that up. Keep it tight to the back of the fly, because I got to get some more stuff in here. What's going to go in here is 2 little clumps of hair that are going to point backwards over the top of the fly. And this is where my squirrel back comes in. I don't know if you can see the color in this. See, it's nice, darkish rusty brown in the middle and grayish brown on the back. So I want this dusty brown stuff in the middle. So I take a pinch of hair out of the middle, sort of a good 1/4-inch diameter pinch. Take my scissors right down on the skin of the squirrel and snip it off. So I get a clump of hair that comes off like so. And there's a whole whack of fuzz in there. What I want to do is I just want the tips. So grab the tips with your left hand and gently pull a bunch of the fuzz out. So what started out as about a 1/4-inch thick chunk of fur with the tips sticking out is now down to about 1/8. Going to measure that back to just behind where the thorax started. Grab it with my left hand, and I'm going to cut the excess off the front so that just a bare, less than 1/8 of an inch sticks out the front of my fingers. Take my thread right back, right on that last little bit of dubbing that I put on, and do a first wrap right over top, nice and loose. Do a second one, and you'll see now I've got that dubbing, those feathers sticking out backwards at an angle right on top of the body of the fly. So now we need some more thorax. That's going to take more dubbing. So this is a dubbing intensive fly. Originally, I think you could probably do it with the burlap rather than the hairs here if you mix some antron in with the burlap so that it would actually adhere to the thread. But I could not get the burlap to stick. So build another chunk of thorax, nice and bulky. Get my thread in front, but I've left a little bit in front. You see, I've left a little bit between the thorax and where the bead is. One more chunk of squirrel fur. It's easier if I can see where it's going. Grab those tips, pull the fuzz out, and again, down to about that 1/8 inch side. Measure it back so it's a little shorter than the last one, and trim it off so that's that 1/16 of an inch sticking out in front of my fingers. Lay that down right behind the bead and tie that in. So now I have 2 batches of squirrel fur tip pointing backwards, one over top of the other with a little bit of a gap in between them. And the last is just a tiny little bit of dubbing that's going to cover up that darkly colored part of the squirrel fur that's right behind the bead. Slide them up and build up a nice bulk of a little more, maybe. Just a little bit of dubbing in behind the bead that matches up in diameter with the thorax and sort of tapers it towards where the bead is. At that point, we get my whip finisher. Wow, where my whip finisher went. Well, use my hand whip finish. And I'm making sure that these thread wraps are seated well behind the bead, seated below the front of the bead. This way, I don't need glue. because they're going to be well protected in underneath. The double web finish will do the trick. Now, the last little bit of thing that I need to do is turn the fly upside down and take my scissors on the bottom and trim off the hackles that are pointing downwards. I just want the hackle fibers that are sticking out the side. And there's a few stragglers back there. And that's the guy. That's him. It's got just hackle fibers that are the legs that stick out the side, and these two bits of squirrel that are the wing case out the back. And I think this is sort of in the emerging stage of the insect. So there's your burlap stonefly. Take the spotlight off.
Very nice, Dave. That's
There you go.
Shows you that there's no end of materials you can use.
Yeah. Well, the thing I like about this guy is he's got a sort of a little bit of a rough finish at the front, but the burlap makes it nice and tight at the back with a really nice segmented body. And if you pick the right dubbing color, they match pretty close. And if you've ever seen those larger stoneflies that, like I say, that live on the Bow River, this is not a bad color match for those. So there we go.
I would also tie these in smaller sizes.
Yeah.
Because what happens with some of these, what we think of big stoneflies, they spend 2 years in the water.
Yes, they do. Yeah.
And I've read this somewhere and then I've experimented with it. Fishing sizes 10 and 12s can be quite productive because there's lots of there are lots of nymphs in those sizes.
Yeah.
At any point in time, you know, the ones that are not necessarily fully grown, kind of this in between size as well.
Yeah. The other thing is this particular pattern style can be used all the way up to the really big salmon flies. It's basically the same insect. It's just the salmon flies are a lot bigger. I've ran into salmon, the actual salmon fly hatch only a couple of times. The first time I was attending a lighting conference in Portland and managed to catch one of the guys there and to take me out fishing on the Deschutes River. And we hit the salmon fly hatch on the Warm Spring Indian Reserve. And those things were immense. And there were a gazillion of them. They were on every single tree, limb. It was on your hat, on your shoulders, crawling down your neck. And they were the size of my little finger. They were immense. They were between 2 and 3 inches long and fat. And the other time I ran into it was there was a salmon fly hatch on the river that comes out of Wells Gray before it hits the river that's headed south. And they were on the waterfall there, and you could see these huge salmon flies on that river.
What time of year was that, Dave?
It was in early spring.
As in what, May, June?
Yeah, sort of April, May. Yeah, we had
because on the Alberta side, the challenge with the stoneflies, it's either the fishing is closed
or it's runoff.
You're at the peak of runoff.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, you know, people talk about these things and, you know, you tie these gigantic things to fish the hatch and whatnot. But the reality of it is most of the fishing with the stonefly is of the searching kind where you tie, you know, you tie the smaller ones.
The ones on the shoot, that was the first week of June.
Yeah, well, in Alberta, the foothills don't open till mid-June.
Yeah.
In BC interior, I think the streams don't open till July 1. So
we
I
don't
don't know about Wells Gray, what the calendar is there.
Yeah. I don't recall precisely what it was, but
Yeah,
there
and
were
then
lots of them around.
until the beginning to mid-July, you're typically in runoff.
Yeah, yeah.
So unless it's an exceptional year and you can go June 15 at higher elevations, you might run into some of these guys.
Yeah.
I know the castle has a beautiful hatch of these things because looking at the number of shucks you see on the rocks,
Yeah, they're prolific.
it's a huge hatch of golden stones, but it always happens before I get there. So,
And of course, because these things like fast water, they're always hatching in the fast water. You know, it's not riffle run. It's in the pretty fast, choppy water. The thing I remembered about that trip to the chutes was that I had not brought much with me, so I had 3 big sofa pillow flies with me that were probably the right size, and I was walking down the side of the river looking to see where the fish were and peering in between the willow bushes, and you could see that there were 12 to 14 inch trout that were hanging in up against the bank. It's sort of, and every once in a while they would just go whoosh right up against the bank of the river because there was a giant fish going up the middle of the river. Well, you would see these bathtub size rises. You'd cast out to one and then bang, sofa pillow gone. Next cast, bang, sofa pillow gone. Those were immense fish, just huge. And they weren't picky at all. If it was big and fuzzy, they were going to whack it. Anyway, I ran out early.
okay. So
Lauren is on.
now for something completely different.
Yes.
This is, I'm reaching, maybe I have one more vise. And then I'm gonna have to buy a new vise because I can't show you anything else. Okay. So this one is the Anvil Vice, the one that they sell under the name the Apex Vice. And it's your basic lever cam vise. It's got a fairly pointy jaws, so it does take a fair range of hooks. What I'm going to be using today is one of these buzzer hooks, so-called, from Togans. They look like this, and this is the stuff. So they're relatively finer wire hook, and it's slightly different shaped than those scud hooks that I've been using also from Togans, the thick wire ones, and also different shaped from the TM code 2457s, or if you want the lighter wire version, the 2487. Now you will notice that this is about half the price of the Dyna-King, and it shows. You can't really do this with the jaws on a Dyna-King. It's not the exact same tight tolerances. But otherwise, this is a serviceable vise. It turns around nicely. It's got the same drawback as all of these vices compared to the Regal. You don't have a really nice comfy rest for your palm here. But it does come, the way it's sold, it's a reasonable value for the money because it comes with both a pedestal, which is what I'm using right now, and they're including a C-clamp with it as well. So you can switch and use whatever you like. Okay, so that is that about the vise, and I'm going to use it today. And I just need to rearrange a little bit here my focus so you can actually see what I'm doing. Whoops. So here I'm going for, in the write-up that I sent you, I think I I pointed to sizes 16 and as low as you want. And then I had some second thoughts about that, because those tiny ones are what you'd be fishing in a stream primarily, and this is what I was tying them for myself. These are tied on size 16 TMCO 2457 hooks, and this is a side-by-side comparison to the big guys. And so I thought I should tie some lake-sized ones in size 10s and 12s, which is what I'm going to be doing today. And so for thread, I'm using a Anvil 3/0 black thread. You can use even slightly thicker thread here because this is a gigantic hook. When you get into the smaller sizes, 16 and down, you would want to use something like uni thread in 8/0. Okay, you want to build a little bit of a body. This is a very slender, it's a fairly fine wire, and you're not at risk of building too much of a body here. Now for the rib on this thing, I'm going to use some holographic Flashaboo, which is nice and fine. And that is not coming off a spool. In fact, you can get it on a spool, but I think you can still get it as a, you know, as a bunch of fine fiber Flashaboo. So this is their 6991 number color, and I think they're pretty consistent about this the labeling of these colors. Anyway, so you want to go a little bit into the bend of the hook here. So this is the challenge with using these types of hooks. Your flies are going to look spiffier, but there's a bit more work when you're tying them. Because everything is hanging at different angles. So once you're satisfied that you've got enough thread there for a body, you just take the Flashaboo and start wrapping. And here you just have to get out of that bend at the tail end. That's the tricky part. You just have to get it in place, and don't pull too hard because it's going to slip on you. Just pull hard enough to keep it tight and bring it to the front, close to the thorax position, where you're going to secure this thing. So what I do is 2 wraps of thread to tighten it on, and then flip the Flashaboo back and do another 2 turns to safely lock it in place. Once I've got that done, I'm going to have to start adding different materials. Now, because of the shape of the hook and the fact that I'm done working around the tail, I'm actually going to reposition the hook in the vise. That makes life significantly easier, in my opinion. So now I've got the work area nice and flat. For the wing pads here, I'm going to use some goose biots. And you can use, I have some here, I think that I've dyed myself a somewhat brightish yellow. And I'm going to use 1 biot on each side. Just pull them off the strip. And I'm going to take, the biot has this natural curve to it, right? And I want to tie it on so that it curves away from the hook. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie it on pointing towards the front of the hook, like this, and a little bit down, so kind of in line with the shank of the hook where it's curving back like this. Then I take my second biot and tie one just like the first one on the near side. Place it against the hook at the right angle and secure it with the thread. Okay, do a few tidying up wraps here. This is serving two purposes. One is I'm covering up the rest of the biot, and second, I'm also building up the thorax here a little bit. Now for the next ingredient, I need a back for the thorax here, and I'm just going to use some standard wide pearl flashabou. This is that so-called saltwater flashabou. Okay, so it's this pearly color, and it turns out very nice once you coat it with either some resin or some Sally Hansen's. Now to make the tying of this easier, and depending on the size of the hook, so this is a size 10, I probably don't even need to do this. But what I like to do with the flashabou to make my life easier generally is I just snip a little corner here. So I get a pointy end that makes securing the flashabou to the hook a little easier. So place this against the shank and tie it on. Okay. I'm just going to make sure that I've built enough of a thorax here. And I can go to the front, just behind the eye of the hook, and attach my gills. Now for the gills, the one exotic material that I'm using today is dental floss. And this is something that's known as super floss. And of course you can use different other materials here. You can experiment. I have some official Gills material for chironomids, which is a yarn that as you can see, compared to the this is I think what Bill was showing us earlier. This is got a bit more sparkle to it than the dental floss does. And then of course there is actual, Antron yarn labeled as such. And I suspect that these two things are fairly similar materials. But I don't know for sure what these chironomid gills are made out of. That's an old package of I think Stillwater Solutions stuff. Anyway, so I'm going to use the dental floss because that has a nice, these fibers have a nice kind of almost a spongy structure to it, and they give a very fuzzy look to those gills. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut a piece here that's about, I don't know, 1.5 centimeters or so, a little bit longer. And the reason I'm cutting it a little bit longer is than what I actually need in the end is because it makes manipulating all this a lot easier. So I put 2 wraps of thread on top. So the first step, I just tie it right on top and along the hook shank. Easy stuff, right? Just do 2 turns of thread, just using the weight of the bobbin, really, not like super cinching down, so that I can then grab the ends of the floss and I can turn the whole thing around a little bit. And when I do that, I will be able to figure 8 my way around these 2 strands, this one strand of floss that's now nicely separated on the two sides. So go a few times on one side, go a few times on the other side. Done. Leave it like this long. The trimming will be done only at the very end. And now you can actually pull these things a little bit out of the way. So what I want to do now is I want to attach my biots and my shell back. So first I take one of the biots, and now I have too many materials here. So I fold it carefully. These things can be a little fragile, so don't pull too hard. So just pull it on top. Whoops. Pull it on top and in between the two tufts of floss, and attach properly with 2 turns of thread. Then fold the rest of the biot back and add another 2 turns. Okay, so this is what you got as a result of doing that. And then trim the excess as close as you can, and then repeat the process with the other biot. Fold it back, so you kind of have to pull it at a bit of a diagonal. If you can see here, what I'm doing is I'm pulling it across and like over to the other side. And again, same thing. Carefully, 1 turn, 2, and get the fluff out of the way, and fold it back. And you want to stay as much as you can right at that point behind where you tied in the gills. Okay, then lift it up and out of the way of cutting anything else that you don't want to cut. Trim. And if you want, to tidy up further here, although this is not vitally important, if you want a tidier looking fly, you can just put another couple turns of thread to clean up there. And then finally, just take the Flashabou and fold it over the top. You cover the thorax and do the same thing. 1, 2 turns to secure properly. Fold back. And 2 good turns. If you're nervous, 3 good turns to lock it in place. And scissors close in and cut it off. Okay, we're almost done. Now just a few tidying up turns. And 2 whip finishes. 1, 2, 3 turns. 1, 2, 3 turns. Cut the thread. And now what we've got is an exaggerated set of gills. That's way too much. Just take the scissors, trim, and then trim the other side symmetric. And that's where the name of mini bow tie, because those gills look like a little tiny little bow tie there. And now for the final step, what needs to happen is a coating of some kind of lacquer that will, whoops, well, I have to find the fly.
So you classify this as a sort of an active fly? It likes to move around on its own?
You're absolutely right, Mohammed. Thanks for pointing it out. The tying is so realistic that, as you can see, this pupa already at the pupal stage has taken flight without deploying its wings.
You just dip it in acetate.
No, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my my Sally Hansen's and I'm going to brush it carefully. And the reason I took it out of the vise is because it's pretty hard to reach the curved part of the hook. So I'm gonna try to keep it on camera here for the coding, but basically it's just be careful, try to stay out of the way of the gills, and you'll find that this floss, you know, it's got a little bit of short-term memory. So if you pull on those tufts a little bit, they will stay in place until you're done with the lacquer. So I'm a great fan of Sally Hansen stuff. So there it goes. So what I do is I start with the underside here. And go in here in the thorax area as thoroughly as I can, because that's a place I don't want to go back to. And then turn it around and coat the rest of it. And with Sally Hansen, so it doesn't run off on you too much, you just have to make sure you take not an excessive amount, and it's kind of, it takes a while to figure out exactly how much of the stuff you need, but you can sort of see what happens is once you coat it, that flashaboo is like magic. So now I think this is all done, and you set it aside to dry up properly. And what I normally do, of course, is if I tie, let's say, you know, my usual half a dozen or a dozen of these things, I tie them all and then I do the coating at the end. And for that purpose, if you're going to buy a bunch of those electronic clips, don't be shy, because the ordering and shipping is the main cost. Get yourselves like, you know, 2 dozen of those clips, because, you know, you do a batch of flies and you'll find that you do need a lot of these clips and put your flies in a row, right? So just get yourself as many clips as you think you need for a batch of flies to dry out. That's kind of what I've done. So I regularly have a box of 12 of these, and I use them for doing like a whole batch of flies at once.
Yeah, they're called test clips, and you can order them online from an outfit called DigiKey.
Yeah, and the brand that I have here is the Easy Hook.
Oh yeah.
And there's another one, I think it's Pomona Electronics. These are the two main brands of that. But what you want is, because these things come in different sizes.
Yeah.
For trout flies, typically you want these, what they call the mini clips.
Yeah.
Now, I can't speak to the salmon flies. There, maybe you could use the bigger clips. I have no experience with that, so I don't know what to tell you.
Where did you get those from, Florin? The one we just had the red
Mail
one.
order. I bought them. I think I bought them from DigiKey like 15 years ago or something.
Yeah.
And I bought myself several dozen. I did exactly what Dave did. I bought, they were selling them for a little better price if you bought by the dozen. So I bought several dozen, and then a bunch of people in the club also wanted some. So I sold off
Yeah, I'll do some research in the next week and see what I can find.
Can you not
Digi-
find those at the source as well?
They used to, but they don't carry that stuff anymore.
Oh, okay.
You know, the source used to be when it was still
Radio.
Radio Shack. They had little bits of electrical components and stuff you could
Yeah.
buy.
That's
But
right.
They've kind of gone out of that stuff. They've become more a consumer electronics place.
Okay.
And so you know, if you've got a good electronics store, there used to be a couple in Edmonton that you could go and get them at. But I don't know what there are here for electronics stores. There must be somebody around that sells components.
Yeah, these are a bit of a specialty item, especially the small ones. For some
Yeah.
mysterious reason, they're not easy to come by because I
Yeah.
searched far and wide, and the best option was to mail order them, and DigiKey is the place.
Yeah, they actually bring them in from the States, but they don't charge you duty on them. And it you know, turn around and an order from them is like a week at the outside.
Yeah, they're pretty good, and it's
Yeah.
worthwhile. It costs a little bit for the shipping, but if you buy enough, it's definitely worthwhile.
Florin, what is the name of that place again? BDC?
No, DigiKey.
DigiKey.
Let me-
DIKEY.
CI?
DIGIKEY.
There it is in the chat.
DigiKey.
Oh, DIDGEY. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a free shipping on orders over $100.
Yeah, and their shipping cost, if it's test clips, it'll be in an envelope and it's cheap.
Yeah.
So let's see. There are 8 of you there, other than me. Times 24 clips per person. That's I think you're making the $100 pretty quickly.
How do you spell that again?
Yeah, look it up in the chat.
Look on the chat.
Tony. DigiKey.
It's DIGI-KEY.
Yeah, there's a dash in there which I didn't type. Yeah.
But yeah, for the website, you just put digikey.ca.
So anyone that's gonna order, let me know and I'll jump in on
Yeah.
their order.
We'll do a little chasing this week to find the right. They have like 800 different models of these things, so I'll have to find the right model. I've ordered lots of stuff from DigiKey over the years when I was still building some electronics bits and pieces.
Yeah, see, I have here like a little.
Yeah, you can get a
forest.
rainbow.
Yeah, I
rainbow
got
part.
they were selling when I bought mine. They were selling packs of 12 in assorted colors.
Yep.
So I got myself. I have these things in a bunch of nice vibrant primary colors, and then I have another dozen of those in plain black.
Yeah.
And I use them a lot.
Yeah, I'm
I-
down to one. This is my last one.
Yeah,
those
Dave,
are-
you
those are
need
slightly
some. I mean, if you're buying hooks by the thousand, you need a couple of dozen of those clips.
Anyway, we'll have a look. Like I say, I bought lots of stuff from them. They carry a huge inventory of different materials. And
Yep.
those clips come in about 10 or 12 different sizes and configurations. So I'll look and see what would be the proper ones for what we want it for.
Yeah, that's the biggest challenge, is to find from their huge listing of product the one that you're really looking for.
Exactly. I just went on there and it's like, oh, this huge list of stuff. So
I know.
try and filter.
Yeah, I bought small electric motors and integrated circuits and transistors and PC boards and little enclosures and stuff from them over the years.
So whoever does the order, let me know, and I'd like to get
Yeah.
a couple of dozen.
We'll probably talk to you next week and make up an order.
Here, I'll
Florin,
I'm
could you show
interested
me your
too.
fly again?
Yes, let me put it in the Vise or just do the share screen, because
Well,
if
that's a very personal question to ask someone to see their fly.
so this is the coded version, and you can see those 2 biots are coming kind of at a bit of a diagonal on the sides.
Yeah.
So when you attach them, this is the thing. When you attach the biots, you want them pointing backward and slanting down, so that when you fold them forward, they go and they wrap around diagonally on the thorax.
Mhm.
Now I got this recipe out of the Takahashi and Hrubka Midge book, and they like to tie in the gills first and then build the fly.
Mhm.
But I found that to be unnecessary and a bit of an extra headache. The only thing you want to make sure of is that you leave yourself enough room. So if you have trouble leaving enough room at the head of the fly for that step, then by all means put the gills in first. But otherwise, I find it works just as well to put the gills in at the end. So that's the fly.
Yeah, the ones that use a bead, if you put the gills on first and then shove the bead up against them.
That's a different recipe.
That's
That's a completely different. That's a completely different thing. And
Yeah.
I experimented a bunch of glass bead flies here. And I'm really curious to see. These are all on really small size hooks. So these are meant to be 16s and 18s tied on one size up curved hooks. And for a stream, you typically want the smaller sizes. So these guys in the Midge book, they're saying, you know, for this fly, they're saying basically start at size 18 and then go down to 26.
Oh, geez.
I don't know. I don't
Fishing for, you're fishing
don't
for
have
minnows.
hooks that size. I can't speak to that stuff. But you know, down to basically like the smallest ones that you see here. These are not so hard to tie. And you might find that for the dental floss, you know, first of all, you might find that using actual biots are a little bit too big, and you want to substitute that with some of that holographic material in different colors. You'd also find that the standard flashabou is too big, in which case you can use 2 strands of the finer style flashabou, and that works well. So this is not a good example of that style. This is what I meant by that. It's so these are as small as I'm going to tie them for my own purposes for stream fishing, because I think smaller than this